Hello, everyone. I want to outline and summarize a case that came down this week. It's very interesting for two big reasons, and we'll dive into those. It comes out of Lake County, Indiana, which is in the northwestern part of the state. And the facts that happened were a township, so a government entity, owned a building, and they sold it as is, and which is common for real estate deals, of course, as you know. And once they sold the property, they received payment in full from the buyer. But between the time that they received payment and the actual closing, I don't know how many minutes or days or hours that was, but in that interim time period, the seller, the township, went back to the building and removed certain property signs and different things that were attached to the walls and whatnot, and removed them. And the buyer said, wait a second, you can't have those. Those are ours. We bought it as is. They go with the building. They're historical artifacts that are important to us as a buyer. And they, at the trial court level, and they went ahead and closed, which is a key fact. They went ahead and closed. And then at the trial court level, they fought over whether there was damage from that by the seller. Did they harm the property, and did they breach the contract for taking this property away with them? And what's real interesting to me is that the Court of Appeals never really addressed the merits of the meat of the conflict. Instead, what the Court of Appeals did is they reversed the trial court, because the trial court ruled in favor of the township as the seller and against the buyers. The Court of Appeals reversed that. So that's the answer to the case. It was improperly done. But the reason that the Court of Appeals made its decision was not really on the merits of whether there was negligence or whether there was a breach of contract. Instead, the Court of Appeals focused on the procedural aspects of the case. And in law, as you might know, trial courts are ruled or governed by the Indiana Rules of Trial Procedure. And those are very detailed set of rules that govern everything that happens in the courtroom. And a lot of it deals with time limits and just procedures of how things get done. And the Court of Appeals looked at this case and said that the trial court made error by failing to abide by the trial rules. One example was that they didn't give a proper amount of time to the buyer of the property to respond to a motion. And another thing they did wrong was the trial court mischaracterized the proceedings. They just kind of bungled it, according to the Court of Appeals, and didn't follow the trial rules. So I want to raise up to you that it's very interesting that you've got this a closing where there was full payment made, but then the closing didn't occur until later. So we don't know what normally would have happened in the meat of the argument, whether there was negligence, whether there was a breach of contract, whether there was a merger or a waiver by the buyer who closed without dealing with those property issues in advance. So by closing, a lot of times you might lose a case because you've accepted the property at the time. And we don't really know what the real law is going to be on that issue. And we don't really know whether the personal property that was taken is technically a fixture because it was attached to the property, or if the Court of Appeals is going to decide that it's really personal property, like a desk or a pen or a normal painting or something that you would have, filing cabinets in an office, that goes with the seller. It's not included in the as is, where is property description. So those are very, very interesting legal questions that we need to know answers to. But instead, the Court of Appeals addressed the procedures that were used and not followed by the trial court. So the final thing I want to leave you with as a client, as a potential client, or as a person going to court, you need to understand that there are two things happening. One is your case is being decided on the merits. And in this case, again, they never really hit that part, whether there was a breach of contract or not, and who gets the property and that part. And then there's the procedural part governed by the trial rules. And the Court of Appeals said we're never going to get to the meat of the case, because we're back here on whether or not the trial rules were ever even followed correctly. So when you litigate your case, you must be understanding that there are two things going on side by side in your case, and it can be very frustrating to a lawyer or to you as a party because we're just driving at the meat of the case. What really happened here? Who was wronged, right? Or whether there was a right or wrong. And there's also this whole other idea procedurally what's going on. And so we lawyers are always fighting these trial rules or fighting with the trial rules on your behalf and using them to defend you or using them as a manner of attack to protect your interest that way. So you're always attacking and defending in every matter. So be aware that it's not just what happened and what's the meat of the case, so to speak, but it's also the trial rules have a very big impact on the case. And so this thing's going back to the trial court with instructions from the Court of Appeals on what to do next. I hope that's been helpful to you and you've learned something from it, and it'll help guide you when you're litigating a case. And of course, we're always here to defend your territory. Thank you.